There are people who not only live one life, but must exist in two parallel worlds. And Hakim Ziyech is one of them. Born in the Netherlands, but carrying Moroccan blood, he grew up between two cultures where nowhere truly called him Thiers. In the Netherlands, he was an immigrant child, different, quiet, and hard to understand. In Morocco, he was the one born in Europe, a stranger to his own roots. That division was not only geographical, but a void, an identity, a feeling of being lost that followed him from his early years. Losing his father very early, lacking a guiding figure, Ziyech grew up with questions no one answered, with a silence that gradually became a protective shell. He did not speak much, did not explain, did not try to please anyone. But that very silence made him misunderstood, labeled as distant, rebellious, not fitting in. Few realized that behind that coldness was a hard will forged from lacks and wounds. When you do not belong anywhere, you are forced to learn how to stand alone. And Ziyech did that not loudly, not complaining, just quietly moving forward, carrying both worlds within him without losing himself. Right from that torn foundation, he stepped onto the field not only to play football, but as a way to prove that even if he did not belong anywhere, he could still create a place for himself. From those quiet steps, Ziyech built a career that any player must respect. At AFC Ajax, he became the creative soul, contributing to taking the team to the semi-finals of the Champions League 2019, where they defeated both Real Madrid and Juventus on a journey that shook Europe. He won the Eredivisie title, the KNVB Cup, and was continuously honored as one of the most outstanding creators on the continent. When he moved to Chelsea FC, despite facing many challenges, he still featured in the team that won the UEFA Champions League, the UEFA Super Cup, and the FIFA Club World Cup titles that very few players can touch. On the international stage, in the Morocco national team shirt, Ziyech became a symbol when he helped the team reach the semi-finals of the World Cup 2022, an achievement never before seen in African football history and the Arab world. He not only played but also sacrificed all his prize money to support the community, turning personal success into collective value. The titles, the big matches, the shining moments all were not just achievements of a player, but proof of the journey of a person who had overcome the division of two worlds to write his own name in history. Before continuing, please hit like and subscribe to the channel to follow together the journey of a person who had to stand firm between two worlds where nowhere truly belonged to him. That is a small way for you to send respect to a person who still quietly moves forward, even though he has never had a clear path for him. In the stadium lights where everything seems clear and bright, few know that behind that person is a childhood that began with a lack that no child should have to go through. Hakim Ziyech grew up in the Netherlands in an immigrant family of Moroccan origin, where life was not measured by dreams, but by days of trying to keep everything from collapsing. It was an environment where children learned to be silent before learning to speak, learned to observe before being taught how to understand the world. In a house always full of people but lacking stability, he did not have much space to be a child in the true sense. The voices, the worries, the invisible pressures covered everything, making childhood pass faster than normal, not because it was beautiful, but because it was too heavy to hold on to. His father passed away when he was very young, a loss that came so early it did not leave clear memories, but left a void that could not be named. It was not an explosive pain in one moment, but a prolonged absence, quietly creeping into every stage of growing up. While other children could turn to their father after a long day, could ask questions, could lean on a solid shoulder, Ziyech did not have that choice. There was no one there to tell him that everything would be okay. There was no one there to show him how to stand up when he stumbled. And in a world like that, he learned not to expect, not because he did not need it, but because he understood that there were things he would never have. His mother became the only pillar, a woman who had to carry the burden of raising many children, in circumstances that were not easy at all. She had no time to be weak, and no other choice but to continue. The long days passed in fatigue, in endless worries, and in a silent love for her children that was not always expressed in words. In a large family, attention had to be shared equally, and sometimes that meant no one received enough. Ziyech grew up in that love, but also in the feeling that he had to take care of himself more than a child should. No one watched over his every step, no one controlled or directed clearly, and no one really understood what was happening inside him. That very absence created a hard-to-grasp personality. He was not a noisy child, but he was not someone who integrated easily either. He observed more than he spoke, reacted more than he explained. When misunderstood, he did not try to fix it. When judged, he did not argue back. Gradually, silence became his main language. At school, he did not stand out in the way people expected. He was not an excellent student, nor was he the one who got attention. In youth football environments where discipline and frameworks were placed first, he was often seen as difficult to teach, as someone who did not fit the system. But no one stopped long enough to ask why. No one saw a child trying to understand the world without a map. The feeling of insecurity did not come from one specific moment, but from the accumulation of many small things. The times he was not listened to, the times he was overlooked, the times he had to solve things beyond a child's ability by himself. It was not loud, not clear, but it was there, day after day, gradually shaping the way he saw everything. He did not trust easily. He did not open up quickly, and more importantly, he did not seek recognition from the outside, because he had gotten used to not having it. When there is no center to return to, a person either collapses or becomes the center of himself. Ziyech chose the second way, but that was not an easy choice. It meant having to grow up early, having to learn how to protect himself, having to accept that there would always be missing parts in life. It also meant having to carry a feeling of being lost even when standing in a crowd. Other children could find themselves through family, through guidance, through encouragement. He did not have that path. He had to draw it all himself, little by little, in the silence that no one really saw. And right from those years, a person began to form not from fullness but from what was missing. Not from stability, but from gaps that were never filled. The gaps from childhood did not disappear when he grew up. They only changed how they showed, becoming clearer when he entered his teenage years, the stage where a person begins to be judged, compared, and labeled most harshly. For Hakim Ziyech, that was the time when everything became harder than ever. He stepped into the school and youth football environment not with the confidence of a well-prepared child, but with an inner self already used to figuring things out alone. But the outside world did not see that. They only saw a quiet boy, not easy to control, sometimes reacting in ways that made others uncomfortable. In the eyes of many adults, he was not a child who needed to be understood, but a problem that needed to be fixed. At school, he did not find connection. The rules, the frameworks, the expectations set did not leave room for people like him, people who did not know how to express their emotions the way others expected. When misunderstood, he did not explain. When punished, he did not resist with words. His silence gradually was mistaken for attitude, for non-cooperation. But behind that was something much simpler. He did not know what to say, and he also did not believe that anyone really wanted to listen. In football, where he could have found release, everything was not easier either. The youth academies demanded discipline, compliance, and the ability to adapt to the system. Ziyech had talent. No one denied that. But his talent came with a way of expressing it unlike anyone else. A freedom, an instinct, a way of playing football that did not completely fit the framework, and when that combined with a reserved personality, it became a reason for him to be doubted. He was not an easy player to manage. He was not someone who always followed instructions perfectly. And in an environment that valued control, that was enough to make him a name to be eliminated. There were times when he was pushed out of the system, not because of lack of ability, but because he did not fit what others expected. Those decisions came quickly, coldly, and without explanation. No one sat down to ask what he was thinking, what he was feeling, or what had made him like that. No one saw a child trying to keep balance in a world where he had never felt safe. All they saw was a young player who did not comply, an individual who did not integrate easily, a name not worth investing more time in. Each time he was eliminated, each time he was rejected, did not create an emotional explosion, but only deepen something that had existed before, the feeling that he did not belong anywhere. And when that feeling repeated enough times, it was no longer a passing thought, but became part of the person. He no longer expected to be understood. He no longer tried to be accepted. Instead, he learned to exist in the distance, keeping himself separate from what could hurt him more. Right in this period, Ziyech's personality was shaped more clearly. He became quieter, not because he had nothing to say, but because he did not see the need to say it. He observed more, thought more, and kept everything inside. To outsiders, that was coldness. To him, that was the only way to control a world he could not change. The comments, the evaluations, the labels all gradually became background noise that he no longer reacted to as strongly as before. But that did not mean he did not feel it. It only meant he had gotten used to enduring without showing it outside. Being labeled early created a hard-to-break loop. When people believe you are a problem, they will look at every action of yours through that lens. And when you are seen that way long enough, you no longer have the motivation to prove the opposite. Ziyech did not try to change the way others saw him. He did not try to please them. He just continued to move in his own way, even though that path was not clear and often led him out of places where he could have stayed. Those years did not bring fame, did not bring success, but left the deepest mark. They taught him how to live without needing recognition. They taught him how to accept being misunderstood without losing himself. And more importantly, they made him become the person the world would later see: a talented player, but always keeping distance, always carrying a silence that not everyone could read. Before being known as a star, he had been a misunderstood person for a very long time, and what the world saw later was only the surface of a journey that very few had ever really tried to understand. When a person has gotten used to being misunderstood, they will no longer seek acceptance, but only seek a place where they can exist without being distorted. For Hakim Ziyech, that place gradually was no longer school, no longer the relationships around, but narrowed down to a very specific space: the football field. There, he did not need to explain who he was, did not need to say anything, because the ball spoke for him. In a world where he could not control how others saw him, football became the only thing he could fully control. Each pass, each move, each decision on the field was in his hands, not misinterpreted, not given extra meaning. It was not a dream in the romantic sense that many still tell, not the image of a child nurturing the ambition to become a star. For him, football first came as a place to escape from the voids in family, from judgmental looks, from the feeling of not belonging anywhere. The first training sessions did not come with lightness. They took place in imperfect conditions, with an unstable mind, with a child still carrying too many unresolved things. He was not always the most hard-working in the way coaches wanted. He was not an easy player to coach, not someone who always followed instructions mechanically. But in every moment he touched the ball, there was something very different: a naturalness, an instinct, a way of seeing the match that did not need to be taught. Those things did not come from lesson plans, but from the fact that he had gotten used to finding his own way in life. When you have to learn how to exist by yourself from a young age, you also learn how to make decisions without anyone guiding you. And on the field, that became an advantage. However, that advantage was not always recognized. In youth training environments where discipline and structure were placed first, a player like Ziyech was easily seen as not fitting in. He did not integrate quickly, did not create a feeling of safety for those who wanted to control everything. Training sessions with him often came with instability, sometimes explosive, sometimes faint, sometimes astonishing everyone, sometimes making them uncomfortable. But that very instability reflected exactly who he was at that time. A person still trying to understand himself while being required to fit a preset mold. Nevertheless, talent could not be hidden forever. Little by little, those who truly looked at the expertise began to notice something special in him, not in stability, but in the ability to create difference. Not in how well he complied with the system, but in how he could do what the system did not teach. That very thing opened the first door that brought him closer to professional football, where everything became more serious, harsher, but also clearer. When he joined the professional environment at SC Heerenveen, Ziyech stepped into a world where the gap between potential and reality became clearer than ever. There was no longer room for explanations about the past. No one cared what you had been through before. Everything was measured by what you showed on the field, and for him, that was both an opportunity and pressure. An opportunity to prove that what he had was real. Pressure, because this was the first time he had to face a system that did not accept prolonged instability. The early days there were not easy at all. He still carried old habits, silence, keeping distance, not opening up easily, in an environment that demanded connection and communication that made him feel lost. But when the ball rolled, everything changed. His moves began to attract attention. Decisive passes, creative moments, situations that only he saw. His talent no longer existed only in training sessions, but began to appear in official matches, where pressure was greater and value was recognized more clearly. Gradually, the name Ziyech was no longer mentioned only because of personality, but because of ability. He began to be noticed, to be highly evaluated on the professional side. But that did not mean everything became stable. Inside, he was still the same person, still carrying doubt, still keeping distance from the world around, still not completely trusting that he had found a place to belong. Early success did not erase what had formed before. It only created a new shell, where others began to see him differently, while he still saw himself in the old way. Football had given him a path, but it did not bring answers to deeper questions. It helped him stand firm, but it did not make him feel safe. It opened opportunities, but it did not erase the feeling of being lost that had existed for so long. And perhaps precisely because of that, each step forward of his was never simply a career step. It always came with a silent struggle between moving forward and trying not to lose himself in the process. What began as an opportunity gradually became a challenge that not everyone recognized, because when talent is placed in an environment that demands more, it is no longer a simple gift but becomes a burden to carry every day. When Hakim Ziyech moved to FC Twente, he was not just a young player looking for a place to stand, but quickly became the center of everything a person the team began to rely on, a name expected to lead, to create difference, and to keep the collective moving forward in a period that was not easy at all. For many, that was a career step, a sign of maturity and recognition, but for him, it was a change he had never really been prepared to face. Becoming captain when still very young was not just a title. It came with responsibility, with looks, with expectations that no one said but were always present in every match. People expected him not only to play well, but also to be a role model, to be the one who kept stability for the whole team, to be the one who spoke up when needed. But Ziyech was not that type of person. He did not grow up with conversations that taught leadership, was not prepared to become a leader in the traditional sense. He was a player who played with instinct, with emotion, with what happened inside him, not with what others expected him to show. And when those two things collided, distance began to appear. On the field, he was still the one who could create difference. His passes opened opportunities. His moves brought hope in stuck matches. But off the field, he still kept the familiar silence. He did not speak much in the locker room, did not try to become the center of attention, did not try to build the image of a leader in the way that people easily accepted. That made his role more complicated. He was the captain, but he did not look like a captain. He was the most important person on the field, but he was not the easiest to connect with off the field. The pressure did not come from one specific moment, but from the accumulation of increasingly large expectations. Each match was no longer just an opportunity to show himself, but became a test. When the team won, that was expected. When the team lost, the looks turned to him. His talent made others believe he could do more. But no one really understood that there were things that could not be solved just by playing ability. The gaps from the past, the unnamed emotions, the habits formed from having to protect himself all were still there, not disappearing just because he was standing in a higher position. There were nights after matches when the noise had settled. When everything returned to silence, he was still the same person. No titles in the locker room, no captain's armband on his arm could change that. Talent helped him go further, but it did not help him understand himself more clearly. It opened doors, but it did not bring a feeling of belonging. And in a world where everything seemed to revolve around achievements, not finding stability inside became something hard to say. The feeling of isolation did not disappear when he became more important. It only changed form. Before, he stood outside because he was not noticed. Now he stood alone in the center because no one could really reach his true self. Teammates respected him, coaches trusted him, fans expected from him, but all of that was not enough to break the shell he had built for so long. He still kept distance, still did not share much, still chose to act rather than speak. In difficult moments, when the team needed more than a good player, needed someone who could connect, inspire, and keep everything together, Ziyech was often placed in a position where he did not feel natural. He tried in his own way, but that way was not always understood correctly. And once again, the old story repeated. Not because he was not good enough, but because he did not fit what others expected. At FC Twente, he developed strongly on the professional side, but inside the old things remained intact. Talent brought him forward, but it did not bring peace. Responsibility made him more mature, but it also made clearer the limits he had to face. He did not collapse, did not give up, but he also did not find answers. And perhaps that is what made his journey different. Not because he lacked ability, but because he carried more than what people could see. Not every place in football brings a feeling of freedom. And for Hakim Ziyech, that became clearer than ever after the years of carrying pressure without a real support. But then a place appeared. Not like a miracle, but like a rare space where he could breathe without being bound when he joined AFC Ajax. There, for the first time in his career, he was not required to become a different version of himself. No one tried to fix him. No one forced him to speak more, to behave according to a certain mold. Instead, they looked at what he could do best and let him develop from there. That seemingly simple thing was something he had never really had before. Ajax was not just a club, but an environment where creativity was seen as a core value. There, football was not squeezed by rigid discipline, but opened up as a space to express instinct. And right in that space, Ziyech began to change. Not in essence, but in the way he was seen. The passes that were once seen as risky now became highlights. The personal decisions were now seen as creative. What once made him doubted now became the reason he was trusted. That trust did not come immediately, but when it appeared, it created a clear difference. He no longer had to prove he was not a problem. He no longer had to resist the way others defined him. Instead, he only needed to play football the way he always knew. And when no longer limited by old prejudices, his ability began to develop stronger than ever. He became the center in the playing style, not because he was given a title, but because of the way he influenced everything that happened on the field. The matches at Ajax gradually carried a different rhythm. When the ball came to his feet, there was a slowdown just enough to see the spaces that others overlooked. The moves no longer carried the feeling of instability like before, but became purposeful, directed. He did not change the way he played, but the surrounding environment made that way of playing more meaningful. And for the first time, he not only existed in a system, but was truly part of it. The professional development came very clearly. He not only created opportunities, but also controlled the rhythm of the match. He not only participated, but shaped the way the team operated. The numbers began to reflect that: assists, goals, direct contributions to the result. But more important than the numbers was the feeling inside. He no longer stepped onto the field with the mindset of having to prove something. He stepped in with pure focus, with a calmness that had rarely appeared before. However, this freedom did not completely erase what had formed before. He was still the quiet person, still kept distance, still did not open up easily. But the difference lay in the fact that he was no longer forced to change that. He was accepted with who he was, and that was enough to create a stability he had never had. Not perfect stability, but a fragile balance that was enough for him to continue moving forward. In the years at Ajax, he not only became a better player, but also for the first time felt what he had lacked for so long: the feeling of fitting in, not belonging in the complete sense, but a place where he was not pushed to the side, a place where his difference was not seen as a problem but became value. And in a journey full of times being misunderstood, that meant more than any title. But even in that period, there was one thing that did not change. He knew that what he had was not permanent. Football always moved, the environment always changed, and what fit today might not fit tomorrow. He did not say it, but he understood, and perhaps precisely because of that, he never completely let go. The freedom he found at Ajax was real, but it was also fragile, like all other good things in his life, coming unexpectedly, existing for a period of time, and always carrying the possibility of disappearing at any moment. There are times in a career when everything seems to converge: talent, opportunity, environment, and even historical moments. And for Hakim Ziyech, the Champions League 2019 journey with AFC Ajax was exactly such a moment. It was not just a successful season, but a series of football nights that made all of Europe stop and watch. Ajax, a team not rated as highly as the big clubs, entered the tournament with doubt, with modest predictions. But match by match, they changed the way the world saw them. And at the center of that change was Ziyech, the person who did not speak much, but left his mark in every ball. When Ajax faced Real Madrid, the team that had dominated the Champions League for many years, no one really believed the story could change. But in the return leg at the Santiago Bernabeu, everything happened in a way few could imagine. Ziyech did not need flashy plays. He moved, observed, and when the moment came, he made decisions that left the opposing defense unable to react. His assist, his precise moves, all contributed to a victory that was later mentioned as one of the biggest surprises of the tournament. And when the final whistle sounded, when Ajax eliminated Real Madrid right on their own field, the world began to pay attention, not only to the team, but to the person behind their rhythm. Not stopping there, Ajax continued its journey when they met Juventus, another team carrying superior history and experience. Once again, the predictions did not side with them, but once again, they overcame. Ziyech continued to be an important factor, not because he scored too many goals, but because of the way he controlled the match, the way he connected the lines, the way he turned seemingly simple situations into clear opportunities. It was not a momentary explosion, but stability in creating difference at the most important moments. When Ajax advanced deep into the tournament, the name Ziyech was no longer a secret. He was mentioned across newspapers, in analysis programs, in discussions about the most creative players in Europe. People began to talk about him as one of the outstanding attacking midfielders, a person who could change the course of a match with just one moment. The recognition came fast, strong, and widespread. From a player once doubted, he became one of the most noticed faces on the biggest stage of the continent. But amid all of that, one thing did not change. He remained silent, not the silence of a person who did not know where he was, but the silence of a person who had become too used to keeping everything inside. The praises did not make him different. The lights did not make him feel closer to the world around. He still stepped onto the field in the old way, still kept distance from what happened outside the lines. To the fans, he was the star of a modern fairy tale. But to himself, it was only a part of a journey he had never felt completely belonged to. The gap between outside success and inside emotion became clearer than ever. When the whole world saw a player at his peak, he still carried the things that had formed long ago: the reserve, the caution, and, to some extent, the doubt. The years of being misunderstood, of being eliminated, did not disappear just because he was being recognized. They were still there, like a foundation that all later success had to stand on. And perhaps, precisely because of that, he never completely let himself go into the moment. There were nights when the match ended, when the cheers gradually settled, when he left the field and returned to quiet space. Everything returned to the familiar state. No crowd, no lights, only himself with thoughts he rarely shared. Success brought opportunities, but it did not bring release. It opened new doors, but it did not close old chapters. And for Ziyech, the past was not something left behind, but something that always went with him, influencing the way he saw everything happening around. Even when standing at the peak of his career, he still kept a part of distance from it, not because he did not appreciate what he had achieved, but because he had never built himself based on others' recognition. What he had was the result of a long journey, but that journey did not begin from big dreams, but from the need to exist. And when you start from a place like that, the way you see success will always be different. It is not the final destination, but only another stage you have to go through. The world might have seen him in that season, might have understood some of his value on the field. But there was another part, deeper, more complex, that still lay outside the view. That part was not expressed through passes, not recorded in statistics, not mentioned in analyses. It only existed in the way he kept silent, in the way he did not let what was outside define him, in the way he continued to move forward without needing to explain. And perhaps that was the hardest part to understand: a person who could stand in the middle of the greatest recognition in his career, but still kept a distance that no one could really reach. After the Champions League nights that made all of Europe mention his name, the path seemed to open in the clearest way. A big step, a bigger stage, a challenge worthy of what he had just shown. And then Hakim Ziyech left AFC Ajax to join Chelsea FC, carrying expectations not only from the new club, but from the whole world that had witnessed what he could do. It was a move that many believed would take him to another level, where his talent was placed in a harsher competitive environment, but also richer in opportunities. However, not every step forward is a natural continuation of what has been. Right from the early days, the difference was clear. The environment at Chelsea was not like Ajax, not in the level of professionalism, but in the way football was organized. At Ajax, he played in a system that allowed creativity, where personal decisions were encouraged if they brought effectiveness. At Chelsea, everything was tighter, more controlled, with specific requirements about position, tasks, about movement when not having the ball. The spaces for free expression narrowed, and what had once been his strength began to become difficult to show in a structure that demanded high compliance. Nothing happened suddenly, but little by little he felt the change. On the field, he was no longer the center of every ball. He had to adapt to different roles, sometimes used in positions not completely suitable for the way he played. The matches passed without clear stability, sometimes starting, sometimes on the bench, sometimes trusted, sometimes substituted early. That inconsistency not only affected his form, but also impacted his feeling about himself and the team. In an environment like that, confidence is not something that can be maintained without continuity. For Ziyech, a person who did not rely on outside recognition to define his own value, the lack of a clear role made everything even more complicated. He did not react strongly, did not speak out publicly, but inside, questions began to appear. Not about ability, but about suitability. Were the things he brought really needed in the way he had once experienced? Was he in the right place? Or was he just a part that did not completely fit in a larger system? The difference in rhythm and physicality of English football also posed its own challenges. The Premier League did not allow much time to think, did not create much space to control the ball the way he was used to. The moves needed to be faster, more direct, and sometimes simpler. But that was not the way he played football. He was used to observing, waiting, and making decisions at the right moment. When there was no longer the condition to do that naturally, he had to adjust. But that adjustment did not always bring effectiveness. The feeling of freedom he once had at Ajax gradually became distant. There were no longer matches where he could control the rhythm the way he wanted. No longer moments when he felt completely in tune with the system. Instead, there were times of trying to find position, find rhythm, find a way to contribute in a structure that had already been shaped before. And in that process, he did not lose his ability, but he lost a part of the naturalness, the thing that had made up his identity from the beginning. Evaluations from the outside began to change. From a player praised for creativity, he became someone questioned about stability. From a name mentioned with expectation, he became the subject of debates about whether he fit or not. The media, fans, opposing opinions appeared more and more. But for him, that was not new. He had gotten used to being misunderstood, used to being seen through lenses that did not fully reflect who he was. The difference lay in the fact that this time it happened on a bigger stage, with greater pressure and with higher expectations. There were moments when he still created difference, a long-range shot, a pass that opened an opportunity, a situation that changed the match. Those moments reminded people of what he could do, but they were not enough to create the continuity needed in an environment that demanded high stability. And when those moments alternated with faint matches, his image became harder to define in the eyes of observers from the outside. Inside, the doubt did not come from what others said, but from the gap between what he knew he could do and what he was showing. He did not lose himself, but he also did not find the best version of himself in that environment. And when a player cannot fully connect with the way the team operates, everything becomes harder over time. It was not a collapse, nor was it a clear failure. It was a slow process where the lack of fit gradually showed through each match, each decision, each moment lacking connection. And in that process, Ziyech continued to do what he had been used to for so long: stay silent, observe, and try to find a way to exist in a world he did not completely control. But this time, the question was not only whether he could adapt or not, but whether he should change to adapt or keep who he was, and accept that not every place was created for him. Those things that happened afterward were not a sudden drop, but a slow process where everything gradually slipped out of orbit without anyone really being able to point out the exact moment it began. At Chelsea FC, Hakim Ziyech did not disappear, but he was also no longer present in the way people once expected. He was still there, still playing, still touching the ball, still creating moments that could change the game. But between those moments were gaps matches where he could not find his rhythm, times when he was substituted before he could make an impact, periods when his name no longer appeared in the starting lineup on a consistent basis. The lack of stability was not only in the minutes he played, but also in the way he was used. Each coach brought a different perspective, a different demand, a different role. Sometimes he was placed on the right wing, sometimes moved into the center, sometimes asked to drop deeper to support defense. That constant change meant he did not have enough time to fully adapt to any position. And when a player does not have a fixed point to develop from, their form also becomes hard to predict. From the outside, everything is seen much more simply. Fans and the media do not see the full picture. They look at what happens on the field in 90 minutes. Look at the numbers: goals, assists, direct contributions. When those numbers are not impressive enough, questions start to appear. Why is he no longer like before? What happened to the player who once made all of Europe take notice? Those questions do not come with patience, but quickly turn into judgments. He is called inconsistent, unsuitable, not meeting the expectations of a big club. Those comments are not completely wrong, but they also do not reflect the full story. They overlook an important factor: the context. They do not take into account the differences in environment, in system, in role. They do not look at how he had to adjust, how he had to adapt, and how those things affected the way he played the game. When a player is judged only by results, what happens behind the scenes is often ignored. And with Ziyech, that is not something new. He has grown used to being seen through only part of the story, rather than the whole thing. The disconnect between him and the system is not something that can be fixed quickly. It does not lie in one specific detail, but in the way everything operates. He is not the only player who has struggled to adapt to a new environment, but with him, that gap seems larger. Not because he does not try, but because the way he understands football does not completely match the way the team demands. When you always have to adjust to fit in, you gradually lose your natural flow. And when that natural flow disappears, what remains is only effort and effort. That is not always enough to make a difference. In difficult periods, there are moments when he almost disappears from the flow of the match. Not because he does not want to participate, but because he cannot find his place in it. His passes become safer, his touches less risky. Not because he has changed his nature, but because the environment forces him to be that way. But those very changes make him drift away from his best version. People no longer see the creativity that once made him stand out, but only a player trying not to make mistakes. Criticism from the outside continues to build up. Every match that does not meet expectations becomes evidence for previous judgments. And in an environment where pressure is always present, those judgments carry weight. But what is notable is the way he responds. He does not speak out, does not argue, does not try to change the story in a way that benefits him. He stays silent, as he has done since he was very young, not because he does not care, but because he does not believe that explaining will change how others see him. The feeling of being misunderstood is not new, but when it drags on in a larger environment with more eyes on it, it becomes clearer. He is no longer a young player in a youth development system, but a name that is followed, analyzed, and judged continuously. And each of those judgments, whether right or wrong, contributes to the image of him in the public eye. But that image does not always match the real person. There are times when everything seems not to be going in the direction he wants. Yet he still steps onto the field with the same attitude. No showing off, no changing to please others, no trying to become a different version. That may make it harder for him to fit in, but it is also how he keeps the core of himself. In an environment where many people are forced to change to survive, keeping your true identity is not an easy choice. The decline that people see is not the loss of talent, but the result of a process that is not entirely suitable. He has not failed in the usual sense. He has not lost his ability, has not lost his understanding of the game. But he also has not found a place where those things can be fully realized. And when that drags on, the feeling of falling begins to appear. Not a hard fall, but a gradual slide, where you are still standing there, but no longer in the position you once thought you would be in. In the context where things at the club level still have not found balance, the choice to wear the national team jersey was once something that gave Hakim Ziyech a different meaning. Not just football, but identity, a place where he believed he could belong in a deeper way. He did not choose the easy path when he decided to play for the Morocco national team instead of the Netherlands, where he was born and raised. That decision was not only professional, but also an affirmation of his roots, of which side he wanted to stand on in his own story. But sometimes, even choices that come from the strongest beliefs do not guarantee the expected ending. In the early years wearing the Morocco jersey, he quickly became one of the most important players. His playing style brought difference, brought a rhythm that the national team had not had before. Fans saw in him not only a good player, but a symbol of a new generation, a person who carried both European technique and Moroccan spirit. But national team football is not only what happens on the field. It is also the way people interact with each other, the way they understand each other, in spaces where pressure is always present. And it is right there that problems began to appear. The relationship between him and coach Bahid Halilhoulid's 3-point Doak gradually became tense, not because of a single event, but the accumulation of differences in perspective. One side is a player used to expressing himself through free creativity. The other side is a coach who values discipline and absolute obedience. Those differences are not easy to reconcile, especially when there is not enough communication to fill the gap. Ziyech is not someone who opens up easily, and in an environment where everything needs to be stated clearly, his silence is sometimes understood in a negative way. Exchanges that do not reach results, misunderstandings that are not explained, and gradually the distance between the two sides becomes larger. The final decision came without much noise, but heavy enough he was dropped from the national team. There were not many public explanations, no dialogue that outsiders could follow. There was only one clear reality. He was no longer in the plans of the team he had chosen from the beginning. For a player, not being called up can be a normal part of a career, but in this case, its meaning is different. This was not a place he was assigned to, but a place he chose himself, not a system he had to adapt to, but a part of his identity that he had decided to attach to. And when he was dropped from that place, the feeling was not only disappointment, but a deeper form of hurt or rejection from the very place he believed he could belong to. The period afterward unfolded in familiar silence. He did not arrange interviews to explain, did not speak out to defend his point of view, did not try to change the story in a favorable direction. He continued to play at club level, continued to keep the rhythm of his professional life, but missing an important part. National team training camps happened without his name. International matches where he once was the center now became unfamiliar. Fans had different reactions. Some supported him, saying he was treated unfairly. Some stood with the coach, believing that discipline must be placed above all. Those debates took place outside, while he kept his distance from everything. But even if he did not show it, that period was not easy. When a part of your identity is taken away, you cannot simply ignore it. He did not change the way he responded. It was still silence, still the familiar approach to difficulties: observe, endure, and continue. But that silence does not mean everything had no effect. It only means he did not choose to show it outwardly. The question still remained whether he could come back, whether everything could be mended, or whether this was a chapter that had closed. In a journey that had already had too many times of having to prove himself, this was another challenge not about ability, but about facing rejection from a place he once trusted. And like the times before, he did not have a clear answer right away. He only had one choice: to keep moving forward, even when the road ahead was no longer as certain as before. After being dropped from the national team, the prolonged silence was not a strategic decision, but almost the familiar instinct of Hakim Ziyech. He did not hold press conferences, did not post long explanations, did not react to the controversies happening around him. In a football world where every statement can become a headline, his silence stood out in a different way. People waited for an answer, a rebuttal, something that could clarify everything, but he did not provide that. Not because he had nothing to say, but because he did not believe words could change the way others had decided to see him. Instead of stepping into the vortex of debates, he returned to the only thing he had always controlled, the training ground and the matches. His days became simpler in form, but heavier in meaning. Training was no longer just preparation for the next match, but became a way to keep the rhythm, to not lose the feeling of himself amid a period full of changes. He did not change his approach, did not try to do anything unusual to prove something to the world. He still did what he had always done, but with deeper focus, as if everything outside had been set aside. In club matches, he continued to play, continued to participate in the flow of football, even if not always at the center. Bright moments still appeared to pass that opened up an opportunity, a surprise shot, a touch that changed the match. But between those moments were quiet periods where he was not mentioned much. That did not make him change the way he played. He did not become louder, did not try to attract attention. He still kept his own rhythm, as he had done from the early days. Keeping distance from the media was not a new tactic, but part of who he is. But in this period, it became clearer than ever. When all eyes were on the story between him and the national team, not speaking out made him become a void that others tried to fill with speculation. Stories were told in many different directions. Assumptions were made, conclusions were formed without confirmation from him. But he still stayed silent, not because he did not realize what was happening, but because he accepted that there were things beyond his control. In that silence, something else happened, a preparation that was not spoken. He did not know when the opportunity to return would come, nor did he know if it would come at all. But he did not act as if the door had closed. He continued to maintain his form, continued to keep his fitness, continued to play football in the best way he could. Not to send a message, but to be ready for whatever might happen. When you cannot control the timing, the only thing you can do is control your own readiness. The patience in this period is not something easy to notice. It is not shown through big actions, but through maintaining a steady rhythm while everything around is full of changes. Every training session, every match, every passing day is part of that process. There is no guarantee that it will lead to the desired result, but he still continues. Not because he is certain about the future, but because he has no reason to stop. There are times when the prolonged silence makes everything feel vague. When there is no clear answer, when there is no specific sign of change, people easily fall into doubt. But for him, doubt is not new. He has grown used to existing in uncertain spaces, used to having to guide himself when no one is leading. And this time is no different. The silence does not make everything disappear. It does not erase what happened, does not change the way others see him, but it creates a period of time where he can keep his true self without being swept up in immediate reactions. In a world where everything happens fast and loud, maintaining stillness becomes a form of strength. Not strength shown outwardly, but strength to not be swept away. And in that stillness, something important gradually forms. The ability to wait without losing direction. Not everyone can do that. Not everyone can continue preparing when they do not know what they are preparing for. But for him, that is the only way. Not because he has a clear plan, but because he believes that if an opportunity appears, he must be in a state ready to seize it. And if it does not appear, he will still be himself, unchanged by things beyond his control. Then comes a time when the silence is no longer just a way to endure, but becomes part of the preparation for something bigger, an opportunity that Hakim Ziyech could not know for sure would come, but still chose to be ready to welcome. When the door to the national team opened again, there were no announcements, no noisy return, only a name appearing again in the list, as if nothing had ever happened, but at the same time as if everything had changed. And when the 2022 FIFA World Cup began, that was not just a major tournament, but a completely different chapter in his journey. A chapter where he was no longer playing only for himself. In the colors of the Morocco national team, Ziyech was no longer the player being questioned about his suitability. He became an important part of the collective that was rewriting history in a way few dared to imagine. Not a lone star, not the center of every gaze, but a link in a system that operated based on connection, discipline, and belief. The difference lay in the fact that this time he did not have to try to find his place in it. He understood his role, and more importantly, he accepted that role as part of something bigger. Match after match, Morocco was not only playing, but creating a journey that made the whole world watch. They were not the highest-rated team, did not have the names most mentioned by the media before the tournament, but they had something else, a connection that not every team has. And in that connection, Ziyech contributed in his own way, not always through explosive moments, but through steady presence, passes that opened opportunities, situations that kept the rhythm when needed, touches that brought calm in tense moments. As Morocco overcame each opponent and advanced deeper into the tournament, the story began to change. No longer a temporary surprise, but a real journey, a reality that everyone had to accept. And when they stepped into the semi-finals, a milestone never before seen in African football history and the Arab world, the meaning of what they achieved became clearer than ever. It was not only a sporting achievement, but a symbol, an inspiration, proof that limits could be broken. In all of that, Ziyech did not change the way he expressed himself. He did not become louder, did not try to step forward to receive attention. He remained the same person, quiet, focused, and letting football speak for him. But one thing had changed. For the first time in many years, he was no longer playing with the feeling that he had to prove something. He played for the team, for the jersey, for the people behind it, for things beyond the personal scope. And when a player shifts from playing for himself to playing for something bigger, the way they approach the match also changes. The moments on the field no longer carry heavy personal pressure. They become part of the common flow, where every action serves a greater goal. He did not need to decide everything, did not need to be the center of every play. He only needed to do his part correctly and trust that those around him would do theirs. That is a different kind of freedom. Not individual freedom like at Ajax, but freedom within a collective where everyone understands and trusts each other. Outside the field, another action drew as much attention as what he did in the matches. He decided to share all the prize money from the tournament for community activities, for those who needed it more than him. No media campaign, no long explanations, just a decision made quietly, like many other things in his life. But that very quietness made the action clearer. It was not a gesture to be seen, but a choice that came from within. In a world where success is often kept as a personal reward, sharing it that way carries a different meaning. It shows that for Ziyech, the value of what he achieves does not lie only in it belonging to him, but in what it can bring to others. And perhaps that is also how he reconnects with the identity he chose from the beginning, not through words, but through actions. The journey at the World Cup did not erase what happened before. It did not change the past, did not make the difficult periods disappear. But it created a new point of balance, a place where he no longer stood alone among unanswered questions, but stood with a collective heading toward the same goal. And in that moment, everything was no longer about whether he belonged or not. It was simply that he was there, doing his part in a story bigger than himself. After those World Cup nights when the whole world called his name with pride, the lights gradually dimmed, the cheers quieted down, and everything returned to normal rhythm, a rhythm that Hakim Ziyech has always chosen to keep for himself. Unlike many other players who use fame to expand their personal image, he stepped off the field and almost disappeared from the public eye. No lavish parties, no status updates showing off his life, no stories told on purpose to attract attention. His life, for the most part, unfolds in silence, a silence not because there is nothing to say, but because he does not want to turn what is private into part of a display. Family has always been the center in that world. Even though he does not often mention it, his bond with his loved ones is something that does not need to be proven with words. The years of childhood lacking presence made him understand clearly the value of preserving the remaining relationships. He does not talk much about his mother, about his siblings, but the decisions in his life often reflect one thing. Family is not a part, but the foundation. In times when he is not playing, he returns to familiar spaces, where there are no lights, no cameras, only people who understand him without him having to explain. His reticence sometimes makes outsiders feel hard to approach. There is not much information about his personal life, no public love stories, no everyday images shared widely. But that very absence is a conscious choice. He does not want his life to be defined by what others see. He does not want to maintain a certain image to meet expectations. In a world where attention can become pressure, keeping distance becomes his way to protect himself. This does not mean he is completely detached from the community. On the contrary, there are actions of his that show a deep connection, only they are not expressed in a loud way. His sharing of the World Cup prize money for community activities is not a one-time case. Over many years, he has participated in activities supporting people in difficult circumstances, especially in Morocco, where he considers his roots. Those actions do not come with media campaigns, are not widely promoted, and are often only known when others mention them. But that is exactly what makes their meaning clear. He does not do charity to be recognized. He does it because he understands the feeling of lack, understands what it is like to not have enough, understands what it is like to have to manage on your own in a world that is not easy. What he gives away is not surplus, but part of his own story. And when a person chooses to share without needing to be seen, that action carries a different value, a value that does not depend on attention. The distance he keeps from fame is not rejection, but a choice. He does not resist being known, but he also does not let it become the center of his life. On the field, he can be a name that is mentioned, a player that is analyzed, a figure in discussions. But off the field, he returns to the role of an ordinary person, with habits, spaces, relationships that do not need to be shared. That separation helps him maintain balance between what belongs to work and what belongs to himself. There are people who find themselves in the attention of others. There are people who need recognition to feel they exist. But for Ziyech, that does not seem to be the motivation. He does not seek fame as a goal, nor does he use it as a tool to build a bigger image. He accepts it as a consequence of what he does, but does not let it change the way he lives. In an era where the boundary between personal life and public image is increasingly blurred, his choice becomes rare, not because it is hard to do, but because it requires clarity about what is important. And for him, that does not lie in how much he is seen, but in keeping what no one sees. What the world knows about him mostly comes from what he does on the field. But the rest, the part he does not share, does not explain, does not display, is where the real person exists, a person who is not defined by titles, not bound by image, and does not need attention to affirm his value. And perhaps that very silence, once again, says more than anything he could speak. The silence he keeps off the field seems to also reflect the career path he has walked, a path that has never really been straight, never completely matching what the football world expects from a talented player. For Hakim Ziyech, every step forward always comes with some offbeat rhythm, as if he and the surrounding system always exist at a certain distance, not because he is not good enough, but because the way he exists in football has never completely fit the established molds. His career does not follow the stable trajectory that many other players aim for. There is no steady development curve from potential to peak and then maintaining position in a familiar system. Instead, there are periods of brilliance mixed with silences. Places where he shines brightly, then leaves. Environments where he fully integrates, then feels lost again when moving to another. That does not create an easy story to tell, but it accurately reflects the nature of the journey he has been through. In places like AFC Ajax, he is seen as a perfect part of the system, a player who can shape the match, someone the team revolves around. But when moving to other environments like Chelsea FC, the same person becomes a question without an answer. Not because his ability changes, but because the way the system operates does not create space for what he brings. When a player has to adapt to demands that do not match his nature, he can exist, but it is hard to fully realize his potential. And with Ziyech, that has repeated more than once. The difficulty in integrating is not a sign of weakness, but a consequence of him not being built to fit every system. He is not a player who can easily adjust to become whoever the coach needs. He plays football in his own way, based on feeling, on instinct, on the ability to see things that others do not see. That makes him special, but also makes him hard to adapt in environments that require high uniformity. The decisions in his career are also not always following the common trend. There are times when he could choose an easier path, staying in a familiar place where he is understood and trusted, but he still chooses to move forward, chooses to face new challenges, even knowing that it may not bring stability. Those choices do not always lead to positive results immediately, but they reflect one thing: he is not looking for safety, but looking for meaning in his journey. Amid all those changes, there is one thing: he does not give up his playing style. No matter where he is, no matter the circumstances, he still keeps the familiar approach. Bold passes, risky touches, decisions that do not always follow ordinary logic. That is not stubbornness, but how he keeps the core of himself in an environment that always demands adjustment. When you change too much to fit in, you can exist, but you can also lose yourself. And for him, that is something he does not accept. That is why the way the world sees him always differs depending on the environment. In one place, he is a creative genius, someone who makes a difference. In another place, he is seen as inconsistent, as someone who does not fit. Those evaluations are not completely wrong, but they only reflect part of the story. They do not take into account that the same player can perform very differently in different systems. Do not take into account that football is not only individual ability, but also the interaction between person and environment. Being seen in many different ways can disorient a player. But for Ziyech, that seems to only reinforce the way he approaches everything. He does not try to change to fit every evaluation. He does not try to become the version others expect. He accepts that he will not be fully understood and continues on his own path. In a football world that is increasingly standardized, where everything is analyzed, measured, and optimized, players like him become rare. Not because they do not exist, but because they are hard to exist long-term in those systems. But that very difference creates its own value that is not always seen immediately, but still exists, still influences, still leaves its mark in its own way. His career may not be perfect by ordinary standards. It has unstable segments, controversial decisions, hard to understand periods. But those very things create a story that cannot be mistaken. A story about a player who never completely belongs to the world he is playing in, but still finds a way to exist and make his mark in that very world. And perhaps that says more than any title or statistic can record. And then, when looking back at the entire journey, from the early days in a cramped house where childhood did not have enough guidance, to the big stadiums where Hakim Ziyech's name is called out in front of tens of thousands of people, everything does not appear as a simple victory story. It is like a series of disconnected segments, where each step forward comes with some gap that is never completely filled. He did not start with a solid foundation, did not have a clear path laid out, and also did not have favorable conditions to develop fully. What he had was lack, losses that came too early, an environment that forced him to grow up before he was ready. And it is from those things that a person is formed, not by ease, but by having to go through each stage on his own, without much support. The losses are not only in losing a father, but also in losing the sense of security that a child needs. The pressures come not only from the field, but from having to exist in a world where he never feels completely belonging. The challenges are not only facing opponents, but facing himself with questions without answers, with emotions not easy to express. And in all of that, he did not choose to withdraw. He did not disappear, did not give up, did not let what happened define his limits. He continued to move forward, not because everything became easier, but because he did not know any other way. In a football environment where competition is always at its highest, where every mistake can be exaggerated, every faint moment can be remembered longer than the good things you do. Simply existing is not a simple thing. But Ziyech does not just exist. He leaves his mark, even if not always in the way people expect. There are times when he is at his peak. There are times when he is questioned. But he does not disappear from the story. He is still there. Still a part of the world he has never completely belonged to. Still continuing to play in his own way, even if that does not always bring immediate recognition. In the hearts of fans, his image is not a simple one. Some see him as untapped talent, a player who could do more if in the right place at the right time. Some see him as a difficult personality to integrate, someone who does not fit systems that demand high uniformity. But there are also those who see something else, a person who does not change to please others. A player who holds firm to his identity in an environment that always demands adaptation. And those people understand that his value lies not only in what he does on the field, but in the way he exists throughout that journey. The legacy he leaves is not easy to measure by numbers. Titles, big matches, memorable moments all are part of the story, but not the whole. What remains longer is the way he has gone through everything, the way he faces misunderstanding without needing to explain, the way he keeps silent when everyone around is noisy, the way he continues to move forward without needing to prove anything to anyone. In a world where many people change to fit in, he chooses to keep his true self. Even if that makes the path more difficult, maybe he will never become the perfect model that modern football often seeks. Maybe he will always be a controversial name, a player that people cannot agree on in evaluation. But perhaps that is exactly what makes the meaning of this journey. Because not every story needs to be clear to be memorable. There are stories that exist in the gray areas, in the things not spoken, in people who are not completely understood. And Ziyech is one of those people. He is still here, still playing, still carrying everything that has shaped him from the early days. Not perfect, not easy to understand, but true in a way that not everyone can maintain. In a world that always tries to put everything into frameworks, he is a reminder that not everyone needs to fit in to exist. Sometimes, just continuing to move forward, holding firm to yourself and accepting that you will never be fully understood, is already a form of victory that not everyone achieves. The story of Hakim Ziyech does not make people heartbroken because of clear failures, but because of a long journey of quiet dislocation. A person who went through childhood losing his father too early, growing up in an immigrant family with shortages, and from there forming a shell of silence that the world keeps misunderstanding. When looking back at details like him being dropped from youth training systems just because of attitude, or conflicts with Vahid Halilhodzic that caused him to be dropped from the Morocco national team, we do not see a rebellious player, but a person who has never really been listened to. Even when reaching the peak with AFC Ajax and the 2019 Champions League, or winning major titles with Chelsea FC, he still does not find the feeling of belonging. This highlights a painful paradox. Success does not always heal inner wounds, but it is precisely in that silence that he shows a quality worthy of respect, persistence without needing recognition, as in the way he quietly trains, returns to the 2022 World Cup, and contributes to the Morocco national team, even sharing prize money with the community without seeking attention. For American society, where individuals are often encouraged to express themselves strongly, this story is a profound reminder that not everyone has the ability or choice to speak out their pain. There are people who need to be understood before being judged, need to be listened to before being labeled. The lesson does not lie in becoming a star, but in learning to look deeper into what is not spoken, because sometimes the strongest people are those who have become used to enduring in silence throughout their lives. If Hakim Ziyech's story makes you think, please hit subscribe and leave a heart. That is how you send respect to a person who has gone through it all without needing to be understood. Thank you for listening, and see you in the next video where we continue to explore a silent but no less powerful journeys.